What if the life you built, every choice, every relationship, every version of yourself was shaped by something you never agreed to carry? This is the Story Impact Podcast, and I'm your host, Lisa Towles. My guest today is Mitchell Hadley, novelist, essayist, cultural critic, and television historian. His published work spans fiction and cultural history, including the existential mystery The Car, the Vatican political drama The Collaborator. Oh my God, I can't wait to read that one. And two books exploring classic television and American culture, The Electronic Mirror and Darkness in Primetime. His newest novel, The Book of Revelations, follows a character, Nan Jaffe, across decades of trauma, identity, and the long road back to herself. Mitchell, welcome to Story Impact.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here, Lisa.
Let's talk about Nan. Nan Jaffe builds what looks from the outside like a very controlled life, and yet the reader can feel kind of the fault lines underneath from the very beginning. How did you construct that tension in the story?
Well, it starts with what happens to her when she's 8 years old, the trauma that's at the center of the story. And we never get to see it through her eyes until near the end of the book. We're seeing it primarily at that point through her parents' eyes, but that I think is the way I looked at it, that people were able to see that exterior. They saw what Nan projected to other people, but they were never really able to understand what happened before that, either through ignorance or just because they only get to see a certain portion of her life and not the whole thing. So I liked this idea tying into Revelations that everybody reveals a certain part of her, like an onion skin, but nobody gets the whole thing.
Mm. And, things like childhood trauma are one of those subjects that a lot of fiction often either sensationalizes or sanitizes and ultimately kind of, like mismanages how it arrives on the page. How did you find the right balance that felt true for Nan's experience and for this story?
Well, one of the concepts that I worked with from the beginning is that as you read the novel, you get bits and pieces here and there of what happened, but in fact, the trauma that she suffers is never actually explained. We don't know for sure what it is. We only can put together an educated guess. Now, there is a true answer to that. There actually is a trauma. I know what the trauma is. Other people know what the trauma is. The reader has to figure it out. But
Hmm.
I thought partly that was a good way by not being so specific about it. You know that she deals with PTSD. You
Hmm.
know that she deals with survivor guilt. You get a certain idea of why she feels that way. But since nobody is privy to the whole story, they can only put it together based on how they see her reacting in the given situations that they have to interact with her. By the time you get to the final revelation at the end of the book, it's the only time you ever see everything get to come together at once. And that's only because you get to see someone who knew her before the trauma and who's able to put everything together afterwards. That's the only time that somebody isn't colored because that person knows who Nan was, not just who she is, but who she was.
So interesting. Characters come to us in all kinds of ways. Sometimes we chase a character, sometimes a character is like, sort of confronting us in dreams and like they just won't go away. And finally the author's like, okay, all right, yes, I'll put my fingers to the keyboard now. How did Nan first come to you?
She came to me in a couple of different ways. I always had this idea of wanting to work with a story of a child who doesn't understand what happens to her, and then she's taken completely out of her environment, never to be seen again by the people who knew her. So I was always intrigued with that idea. When I was in grade school, I had a classmate who has suffered a similar trauma to what Nan suffers, and the same thing happened. She just disappeared. I thought that was an incredibly interesting thing to have happen. But as the story goes on, as I started to develop the personality, first of all, of Nan's parents, Nancy and Sid, and then Nan herself, she took me over completely. You know, up until now, I never believed this idea that you either fell in love with your characters or that they began to tell you what they were going to do. But I have to say, with Nan, I just totally adore her. She completely showed me what it was I needed to do with her. And eventually I realized that all the other characters that I created in the book had to serve her purpose in some way. They either had to be worthy of her or they had to expand on her story either positively or negatively, but they didn't serve the story anymore. They served her, even though arguably through the first 5 or 6 chapters, she's the least important character in the book.
Hmm. Interesting. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm gonna have to read it just to experience it as a reader, you know, and that's one of the best things about hosting a podcast is I learn about so many different types of books. I don't read just one genre. I read fiction, nonfiction, and I look forward to diving into this one. Let's talk about the electronic mirror and darkness in prime time. I'm curious about your connection to classic television. How did all that come up?
Well, as a writer, the first work that I actually started working on was television history. And even though I had begun my initial novel before that, I set up a website, a blog where I wanted to work to talk about culture, politics, entertainment, religion, all these different things. And it gradually came to television.
Hmm.
And what I found out was that there's an amazing amount of information about TV from the late 1940s on that if you read about it, if you read it in its original context, so you're not reading a book about television, you're reading a TV guide from August 23rd, 1958 or something that specific. When you read this, you find out that maybe 80% of the material in that guide, whether it's about the stars or the stories or the issues, 80% of it could be written today.
Hmm.
And when I wrote Darkness in Prime Time, the concept of that is that you have 21 stories that aired on TV between the late 40s and the early 70s. 21 of these stories, every single one of them could have been written today.
Hmm.
Every single one of them talks about an issue that you could interpolate through today's eyes, and every single one brings up something that we're dealing with right now. So you have questions about censorship, you have questions about isolation. There are 2 or 3 stories that serve as perfect allegories of COVID. You have the Holocaust. You have almost everything substantial that has happened over the last 50 years of American life that in some way or other the writers of these stories forecast. They either were predicting it would happen or they were warning us it would happen.
Hmm.
And I tell people that if you watch these shows, many of them remarkably are available on YouTube or video. You
Hmm.
can go back to the late 1940s and see a couple of these shows. They're out there, but nobody knows about it. I didn't know about it until I started working on it. But if you watch these shows, you will swear that they're being written about today. And you will wonder, how is it that we didn't figure this out? You will not be surprised by one thing that's happened in our culture and our society today. Not one thing will surprise you if you watch these shows.
Can you give me an example of a few of them?
Sure. There is a Star Trek episode that I wrote about that concerns the Enterprise and Captain Kirk landing on a planet. The planet is at war with another planet. They've decided the only way that they can rationally conduct war is by using computers. The computers conduct the war, nothing gets damaged. They use computerized simulated attacks, and then they send people to extermination chambers in order to carry it out. So if the computer says 130,000 people were affected by this, literally 130,000 people go and voluntarily become exterminated. And whenever they're asked, they say either that, well, it's for the good of society, or
Mm.
it's what our leaders think are best for us.
I
But
remember that. I remember that episode. Yeah. Uh-huh.
and you can take that to anything that's going on. There was an episode from the 1950s, dramatic anthology series, Kraft Television Theater had an episode called One, and it's a variation of Big Brother. You have a society where all sadness, all pain, all inconvenience has been eliminated. Everybody is happy all the time. And it's because books have been outlawed, because books can only raise negative emotions. It can make you question, it can make you think. And you don't want to think if it's going to make you unhappy.
Yeah.
And so it deals with the one person who resists something like that. There's another one that's very similar to that that comes along. About it takes as its basis, I think it's Thoreau's idea of marching to the beat of a different drummer. People cannot understand why you would not want to be happy all the time.
Mm.
There's a wonderful British movie from the late 1960s with this garish title called The Year of the Sex Olympics. And I'm sad to report that there is no sex in it because it's still British. But the idea behind it is that they have completely anesthetized the entire population through televised sex and other kind, and they have sex porn, but they also have food porn. They have reality porn. They have a show that they create about stranding a family on a deserted island with cameras to record everything that they do in their attempt to survive. And one of the contemporary critics watching this when it was replayed in the early 2000s, he says, "My God, that's Big Brother." The TV series.
Mm.
And so you see this time and again, whether it's on the Twilight Zone or the Outer Limits or any of the classic shows or any of the shows, as I say, that nobody knows anything about. You see them predicting to this eerie level of
Mm.
accuracy exactly what we're dealing with today. And when I started reading this, I thought to myself, people have to know this. They don't even know these shows are existing. I became so excited. It was one of those situations where I just wanted to share it with other people. Hey, look what I found.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much there. I mean, really, what do you think the role of TV is in our lives? Entertainment or something else?
Well, people have been fighting about that literally since the beginning of television itself. It's not only what it is, but what it should be. And a lot of the early pioneers felt that it ought to be educational, period. Then that kind of morphed into an idea of entertainment because you had a corporate sponsorship. And because it became a commercial enterprise, you had to compromise in order to be able to get people to watch it.
Mhm.
I think TV should be entertainment. I think people should have some kind of entertainment like that. I think it should be educational in the sense that it should not appeal to people's baser instincts. It should try to bring us up a little bit rather than to just keep us down. But I also think that one of the problems we've gotten into lately is advocacy television. And we can cheapen it by calling it fake news. But what happens when television begins to not reflect an issue, but to actually actively advocate for it and to shape everything it does in trying to establish that message? That you get that in entertainment TV all the time because you watch it and you wind up thinking to yourself, they're giving me a lecture. They're not telling me
Right.
to enjoy it. So
Right.
I think that that's the problem that, or the challenge that to me TV faces is that it's become too much of a platform and an advocacy for things instead of trusting the viewer to have some discretion as to what's going on and what they can glean from the show. I think that's the problem with TV, I think.
Well, think about what you did with Nan too, thinking about how, like the sort of empty space that you created in the book to allow the reader to kind of fill in their own gaps about what actually happened to her. And I think that's yeah, so when I think about TV, I think about I like watching vintage TV because I love old movies and I love how it was a time there were times in the world where every character didn't have a cell phone in their hand every second. They weren't
Yes.
texting people every second. I mean, I have a cell phone. I do that now, but I like that kind of earlier time. And then you also see when watching vintage TV cigarette commercials, advocating, promoting cigarettes, and like
Mhm.
it was just kind of a different time, and that's the magic of it. But there's a lot to there's a lot of subtext there too.
Well,
Yeah.
and one of the dangers for people watching vintage TV is to try to view it through contemporary eyes.
Mm.
You start to apply contemporary values to what you're seeing from 50 or 60 years ago, and you start to get into real trouble there because you're not only biasing your opinion, but you have a tendency to distort what the original creators were actually trying to say. And I think when you look at a show like Mad Men, one of the knocks that I think that show gets not undeservedly is that it sometimes had a real problem in separating contemporary sensibilities from what people actually felt at the time. And so you see a form of behavior being portrayed as toxic, which it was, but not if you put it back into its cultural context. At
Right.
least people are not going to be aware of it.
I was actually going to mention Mad Men. I mean, I almost can't think of vintage TV without mentioning Mad Men, which is a modern show, but I mean, it's depicting, kind of the life of ad executives in the, I believe, 50s and
Yeah.
60s. And I absolutely love that show. And, Don Draper, talk about, shaping how we think about things. I just love that so
I think
much.
that's a perfect example of what TV is capable of doing. And there were people like Pat Weaver, one of the great TV pioneers, whose daughter Sigourney Weaver went on to some little bit of fame. But Pat Weaver invented the Today Show, the Tonight Show, all sorts of different things with NBC. And that's precisely the kind of thing that he was looking at as well, was this idea of how TV assumes a role that can be advocacy and entertainment and education and all these other things at the same time. He thought TV was capable literally of anything if it was put in the right hands. But if you started to let the wrong people, whether it's advertisers or network executives or anybody else, when you start to let them get involved, they begin to distort the purpose of it toward what it is they want TV to serve. So you want it to be educational. They want it to be the kind of show that people will just come home and sit down and veg out to. And he'll say, but we want people to think. And they'll say, no, we want people to stay awake for the commercials so they'll buy our products.
And there's really only so much control you can have over what someone takes away from a movie or from a TV show. I mean, we, engineer it as much as we want to. You never know what someone is bringing with them into the moment,
Mhm.
how they're feeling in that moment, what they need from it.
Archie Bunker in All in the Family. He was supposed to be kind of the butt of the jokes. Norman Lear and his writers had absolutely no conception that he was going to become a folk hero to half of the country, and that you would have people at political conventions with signs that said Archie Bunker for president, and they were horrified by that. I think they took it well, but I mean, it was so antithetical to what their concept of Archie ought to be like. And that's it. You can't control it once they put it out in the world for other people to see.
Well, that's a perfect example too of what happens as writers with our characters. I mean, we're architecting these characters. I don't know if you're the same kind of writer that I am, but if you map out a character and you do extensive characterizations before you start writing, they surprise you on the page. The character
Mhm.
kind of takes it in its own direction. How do you handle that?
I get rather uncomfortable with it sometimes. I'll give you two quick examples. In the Book of Revelations, one of the conceits of the book is that in revealing Nan's life, these different layers of the onion, in revealing her life, the characters who see her inadvertently reveal more of their own lives as well. So if Nan's coworker is trying to get Nan to be more of a friend, more of a buddy, let's go out and do something at night. Well, you're going to find out that she didn't have an older sister to grow up with. She didn't have something like this. There's a teacher who wants her to act in a Shakespearean play. He wants her to do Hamlet because he thinks that it'll bring her out of her psychological shell. Now, the problem is he wants her to play Ophelia, and somebody who's going through the kinds of trouble she is should not be put in a mad scene in a play. But the point is, he has dual motives. He's a washed out teacher who was involved in an unnamed scandal at an unnamed school in an unnamed past. He feels like if he can help her to recover, that's going to react with him. And he might be able to move on to a better job. So you get them all acting with these different motives. And that became a challenge. Now, answer your question more directly. The new book that I'm working on, the novel called Five, and I'm hoping that it'll be done before the end of this year, and it'll be out probably sometime next year, knock on wood. This is an example of a book where the characters completely took the plot away from me. I had a short story I had written. It was about 9,200 words, and it told a fairly straightforward existential type of story. I decided this could merit going into a novel, about a 30 or 40,000 word novella. And so I started to expand it. And in expanding it, I started to develop the characters so clearly. I don't mean that I did a good job of it, but they started to get characteristics that began to tell me I couldn't end the story the same way I had ended it before. They're I can't do this anymore. I can't do this to them or I can't have them do it. They took over a certain point of the narrative and it was cool, but it was also kind of frustrating. Gee, I had such a great story for you people, and now you're in charge of it, and I don't like that. But it ultimately, I think it works well, but you have to be willing, I think, as an author, to be really flexible and think on your feet. And I have this kind of rule of thumb that I go by that if you can't come up with an answer to the question, maybe the problem isn't that you can't come up with the answer. Maybe the problem is that you're trying to answer the wrong question. And
Mm.
so whenever I get into a box where I'm not happy with what's going on, the first thing I say to myself is, well, did it have to get to this point? Does it have to be asking this question? Let's back up here. Maybe Nan doesn't go to San Francisco. Maybe she winds up in Seattle first, or maybe she's in Boulder, so that by the time she gets to San Francisco, she's got baggage you had never considered before. That's why she reacts when she does the way she does when something happens, because of an event that you didn't consider putting in before.
Mm.
And so I kind of have to go with that and at least find out if it works. But one thing I've learned I can't do is simply say this is the way it's going to be. Period. I'm the author. I know best. If I don't keep an open mind, I'm gonna have a really tough time sometimes, and I love it.
When did you start writing, and what was the first book you ever wrote?
The first book I wrote was The Collaborator, and that I think I wrote about 12, 13, yeah, something about that, 15 years ago, maybe. It is, I wanted to do something I wanted to really do something creative. And so obviously what I decided to do was go off the postmodern deep end. And I wound up writing a novel in the form of a drama. So the collaborator is written entirely as if it was the script of a play. All the
Mm-hmm.
characters are indicated by titles, not by names. They all have their dialogue bugs. Anything that is not pure dialogue is put in the form of stage direction so that you never get inside anybody's head except to how the director would say that the actor should be portraying the role. I
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of fun doing that. I don't know. It seems to have worked out pretty well. People seem to like the book, but I really enjoyed doing something like that. I wrote The Car, which was my attempt to take a look at writing in the voice of an early Don DeLillo or Paul Auster to do something more in the postmodernist vein. By the time I got to the Book of Revelations, I still wanted to do something interesting. I use M dashes instead of quotation marks for dialogue in the book because I think that makes the dialogue just a little more off, a little more natural. But and I tried to limit every character's knowledge to what they would know in real life. They're not explaining anything to the reader. If the first chapter in the book takes place in Indianapolis, Indiana, but I don't tell anybody that because if you live in Indianapolis, you don't say, I'm going to go get a copy of the Indianapolis Star. You already know that. I'm going to get a copy of the Star. So, and you don't say, I'm going to downtown Indianapolis. You say, I'm going to Indianapolis or downtown. Somebody told me once the best piece of writing advice I've ever gotten in my life was I was a coach who told me, don't let your characters act as mouthpieces for the audience. Do not let them explain anything because these characters don't know that they are in a book. They don't know that anybody is reading them. If they wouldn't say this in real life, don't have them say it in the book because then they start explaining instead of demonstrating. And it's a kind of a flip on the show don't tell idea. I think you do tell, but it's not just that you are telling, it's what are you telling? And
Mm-hmm.
you have to be telling things that come organically to the character and not things that are being told simply because you are like a television character saying, in the part of the story you have not seen, this is what happened. You're not recapping the action for the audience, you're letting them catch up.
Um, what type of work have you done in your life before you started writing, and and what kind of an impact do you think it ultimately had on the books that you're writing now?
I worked in the nonprofit fields. I worked in higher education as an executive assistant. I work in various private sector firms. You know, I mean, I've been at the YMCA. I've worked for companies that did corporate training for public speaking, insurance, investments, all these different areas. Now, one of the things it did do was expose me to a lot of different professions so
Mhm.
that I can, if I need to have somebody be a generic businessman, well, he could be an insurance salesman, he could be an investment advisor, he could be an architect. It exposed me to a lot of things there. It exposed me to a lot of dialogue. I learned from talking to people how people talk. That sounds kind of redundant, but people, I'm fond of saying that Gilmore Girls isn't real life. People generally don't get the opportunity to give complete, well thought out speeches when they're fighting with somebody. They're going
Right.
to be interrupted, they're going to be fragmented, all sorts of things are going to happen. And so I try to bring that aspect to what I'm writing itself.
Mhm.
Now, in the more practical consideration, what did working for 40 years do? It essentially prevented me from spending as much time doing what I wanted to do as I did. So I've written a book a year since I've retired.
Mhm.
Um, I used to write a book every 6 years when I was working. So now I'm living the good life. I'm finally able for the first time in my life to actually say that I'm doing what I want to do instead of what I have to do. I've graduated from what Chesterton called being a wage slave to actually being able to do something that I get some pleasure from. As consequently, I look at my books and I say, I want people to read them. I want them to have it in their hands. I don't care about the money. I don't care about being a bestseller. I just want to share things with people.
Wow. What do you read? Fiction, nonfiction? What are your like top two favorite genres that you read?
Well, I enjoy the contemporary fiction field that I write in. I like authors like Joyce Carol Oates
Mm,
or Don DeLillo, Paul Auster. I really enjoy that. I gravitate toward that kind of fiction just naturally. But I also like to read detective novels. I love mysteries. You know, anybody from Raymond Chandler to very contemporary material like your own. I like to read history, biography. I'm a political scientist, actually, by training, which I suppose qualified me to be good in a lot of these jobs because it teaches you 30 different ways to say no without anybody understanding what the hell you've just said. But so I love politics. I love reading about it, writing about it. And I think if you scratch just beneath the surface of anything, you find politics involved. When I wrote about my different TV shows, scratch the surface, there's politics.
mhm,
It's just there.
mhm,
And so those I love nonfiction. I love the histories. But as far and I adore fiction and the contemporary books and the mysteries the most. But
mhm.
I've rarely found any kind of book I couldn't sit down and read. Just the sheer pleasure of reading is for me a treat.
Yeah.
And now that as I've become an author, I've learned to read in so many different ways. I look at reading and I not only enjoy what the author is doing, but I understand what the author is doing and why. And I start to think, well, how would I do this differently? And then I pick up a book, read a paragraph, and all of a sudden I think to myself, that's how I'm going to solve my problem. I'm not going to steal anything. But Joyce Carol Oates is in the middle of this intense sentence and she starts talking about something very mundane. And bingo, that's it. Bring in the mundane. You're going to solve the problem.
Mm. Um, so tell me a little bit about the mechanics of how you write. Are you a disciplined writer? Do you just kind of write when the mood strikes you? Do you have like a certain place that all of the creation happens, and how does that work for you?
My favorite place to work is the kitchen table. So I'll come out in the morning after breakfast and I'll plug in my laptop and I'll get a can of Diet Coke, one of the three that I'll probably go through during the day while I'm working, and I'll just sit down and get to work. And what I've had to do, I have two different ways of working because I have to keep fiction and nonfiction separate. Even though I'm writing my novels and I've written 50,000 words now of the book five, but I'm still writing 4 TV pieces a week. So I have to go back and forth between the nonfiction version of writing, which really takes me out of the story, and the
Yeah.
fiction version where I can be so incredibly creative with it or try to be incredibly creative. But you know that is what I pursue now. I spend a lot of time researching because I love to go down rabbit holes. I watch the classic TV shows in the evening. That's usually when I do not work, unless there's a show that I know so well that I can work and listen to it at the same time. I have my model slot car set in the den that I can play with when I get too worked up. I have a wife who adores me and is the most patient woman in the world who will listen to me bitch and moan and complain about characters that aren't even real and then say, well, have you ever considered this? and and when she starts to actually use the names of my characters in our conversation, well, what did Evan think about this?
Uh-huh.
Or Nan is you've really thrown a lot at Nan, haven't you? I mean, you know, I couldn't. She's my number one beta reader. She's my number one editor. Nothing leaves the house without her having read it. And if she can tell me it's all right and that I'm not crazy, then I'm willing to share it with other people. But you know that's it. I write because I love to do it, and if I find other things to do, like remodeling the bathroom, which I'm working on now, or working out in the garden or something like that, I just find a way to work them all in because I'm retired. If I get bored, I die. So I got to have things to do.
Love it. So where can people find your book, The Book of Revelations?
Mhm.
Just on Amazon, or is it distributed more widely than that?
Yep. You can find it if you go to my website, mitchellhadley.com. You can find links to both Amazon and Barnes and Noble. But if you were to ever search for the title, you can find some of them at Books a Million or other stores like that. But all of my books are listed at my website, and you can all buy them at least through Amazon
Mhm.
on that website. You can also contact me directly there. There's a contact form. If you go to my TV website, it'sabouttv.com, you can search through all the TV things that I write about there. The two sites are pretty independent. There's not much interaction between them. The only thing that they really have in common is me. So if you want just TV, you go there. If you want just fiction, you go there. If you want just me, you can go either place. But
Where is,
that's
I'm sorry, where is your TV website? I have your mitchellhadley.com. That's your author website.
yep.
What's your,
It's called it'sabouttv.com.
it's about TV.com. Okay,
Correct.
cool. All right, yeah.
And I'm very accessible. I'm on social media, and the both websites have all my social media links. I get very lonely there, so anybody who wants to contact me, I will treat you like a long lost friend from high school and throw my arms around you virtually, and you'll be trying to think, God, how do I get this guy off of my favorites list? But I mean, I love interacting with people. I love talking with people about books of any kind, about anything. I'll talk about anything because I'm still in the process of learning. My wife has an expression that I fully embraced from the day of our marriage. She said that if you go a whole day without learning something, it's been a wasted day. And
Mm,
that's kind of how I feel. The day
love
that I
that.
don't learn something new, I might as well pack it in.
I love that. Mitchell Hadley, thank you so much for joining me today. Viewers, thanks for watching, and listeners, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.